Hello, and thank you for taking the time to view this presentation. My name is Jill Cable, and I am a community-based research coordinator and work in Toronto, Ontario. I work for the Women in HIV Research Program at Women's College Hospital Research Institute. Although I joined the team after the CHIWO study wrapped up, I've been involved in disseminating the main output of the study, the women-centered HIV care model that I will be telling you about today. I would like to position myself. I am not a woman living with HIV, but I love, support, and serve them, and I'm here today on behalf of all the women involved in this study. Usually I would not do a presentation without a woman living with HIV here to co-present with me, but due to unexpected circumstances, my colleague Brecklin Bertozzi was unable to join us today. Brecklin has been instrumental in the success of this project, so I would like to recognize her as I begin. She is a fierce advocate for women living with HIV and was a peer researcher with this study starting in 2012. She is also a peer engagement coordinator for the Heads Up 2 study with the University of Victoria, BC, and a dear friend of mine. I'd like to start by recognizing my positionality as a settler on Turtle Island. Our work is carried out all over the beautiful traditional lands of what we call Canada, and we acknowledge we carry out this work on stolen land. I am joining you virtually from what is now called Toronto, land that belongs to the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people. More than a one-slide land acknowledgement, I hope this presentation will demonstrate our team's concrete actions and commitment to centering Indigenous research and women living with HIV in our work. This study and the HIV movement in Canada would not be what it is without Indigenous people. This is an ongoing process, and we continue to learn from our Indigenous partners every day. In the mid-2000s, it became apparent that there was a gap in both research and clinical care for women living with HIV due to the historic focus of the HIV response on men who have sex with men. In 2010, the Canadian Women's Sexual and Reproductive Health Cohort Study, or CHIWOS for short, was born. In this study, we set out to understand what women-centered HIV care looked like and how to make it a reality. CHIWOS was guided by critical feminism, anti-oppression, and social justice frameworks. It centered the greater involvement of people living with HIV and AIDS, GPA, and the meaningful engagement of women living with HIV and AIDS, or MIWA. CHIWOS enrolled and conducted 3 surveys 18 months apart with 1,422 women living with HIV in BC, Ontario, and Quebec. The goal of this presentation today is to summarize how we implemented CBR practices into this large, national, multi-site cohort study, and how we continued this methodology when creating and disseminating the study's main output, the women-centered HIV care model. CBR methodology and the grounding principles mentioned were integral to every single aspect of the CHIWO study. In the formative phase, qualitative data collection from women living with HIV focused the research question. During survey development, 24 groups of women determined each survey section and the specific questions, and then piloted the survey with other community members. Surveys were fully conducted by women living with HIV. We then called them PRAs, or peer research associates. Nearly 50 women were hired over the course of this project, prioritizing women historically underrepresented in research. A critical aspect of the CBR process was to work with and train PRAs, and importantly to provide them with the unique support necessary to ensure their ongoing involvement in the project. After data collection was complete, we were successful in obtaining funding for PRA-led knowledge translation, which involved several knowledge translation programs ranging from art-based activities to educational programming, which eventually led to the development of the women-centered HIV care model. Through these 5 stages, women were engaged and led hundreds of focus groups, feedback meetings, and brainstorming sessions, all of which they were fairly compensated for. All of this work was overseen by several advisory boards, which included representatives from each of the 3 provinces where the study took place, in addition to specific advisory boards for African, Caribbean, and Black women's data and Indigenous women's data. Additionally, several working groups and committees were developed to support PRAs in building capacity. Integral to each aspect of CHIWOS and the women-centered HIV care model development was MIWA, the meaningful engagement of women living with HIV and AIDS. Women have been at the table in leadership positions through each and every aspect of this work and have been fundamental to its success. In addition to the Indigenous Women's Community Advisory Board and the several Indigenous women on the PRA team, CHIWOS had many strong partnerships with Indigenous community-based organizations. One of these was CAN, Communities, Alliances, and Networks. The relationship between all the allied researchers and Indigenous partners was built over many years, and our team has described it using the symbol of a journey of 2 boats, illustrated here. This journey led to a data transfer ceremony in 2017. This ceremony represents one of the first times that Indigenous ethical practices were followed by academic researchers in such a way that the actual raw data was given back to Indigenous partners. The return of the Indigenous women's CHIWOS data to CAN reflects a commitment to self-determination and shifting power to Indigenous people. The amalgamation of all of these years of work and community building is the women-centered HIV care model. Although not exhaustive, the model includes 6 essential care aspects women in CHIWOS shared with us. After its production, the next challenge was encouraging its uptake by both clinical and community audiences, another process that was guided by CBR. The first dissemination method was 2 toolkits, the content of which was co-developed by women living with HIV and allied researchers and clinicians. Webinars were also co-developed and hosted. Finally, a virtual training program for clinical audiences using the University of New Mexico's Project ECHO format was developed. ECHO is by nature a clinical-oriented dissemination method. By integrating women living with HIV as co-presenters, we revolutionized this method of dissemination. Feedback from learners emphasized the values that peers brought to this project, and we are about to launch a national version of this training this month. Other in-progress tasks include the creation of a patient-provider women-centered HIV care tool and specialized adaptations of the model for trans, Indigenous, and African, Caribbean, and Black communities. All of these activities are being led by community. These last 12 years have brought many lessons learned about operationalizing CBR for a study of this size and style. In the formation and development of both the CHIWOS survey and the care model, lessons learned included the benefits of engaging community in the very early stages of a project. This was done through the co-development of the CHIWOS survey questions and the model aspects. By incorporating their lived experience as knowledge, women reported feeling more invested and valued. More experienced peers led much of the survey development process, thus providing mentorship to those with less experience. It was recommended that formalizing this process could have made the learning experience more meaningful. Allowing multiple channels of feedback like email, one-on-one conversations, and Zoom for both the survey and care model was valuable for peers. Finally, an extraordinary amount of time went into crafting the unique survey sections for the CHIWOS survey, and questions that were important to community had to be cut from the survey for length. This was disappointing for everyone, and we learned the importance of creating guidelines on survey item reduction and managing expectations from the onset. During implementation of CHIWOS and the care model, we learned the importance of appropriate compensation, recognition, and acknowledgement for women's time and experience, the importance of ensuring well-being, safety, confidentiality, and ownership of data. This was done through the Indigenous Women's Ceremony, in addition to the implementation of a team counselor and flexibility in deadlines and expectations for each woman's unique circumstances. The community-based delivery of the CHIWOS survey meant often women interviewed their peers and friends. Providing proper training and support on how to navigate these shifting roles was essential. Peers were integral to the knowledge translation process, and providing agency to lead KTE projects resulted in an incredible knowledge exchange and increased community capacity. Through the ECHO model, we engaged women in traditionally clinical dissemination methods, representing a successful novel pursuit. Overall, CHIWOS exemplified how community-based research methods can be successfully implemented in a national longitudinal study to gather actionable knowledge and, most importantly, build community capacity. I would like to conclude this presentation by taking a moment to remember the 73 self-identified women living with HIV who are participants in CHIWOS from across Canada and have passed on before us, and Marisol Desbiens, a CHIWOS PRA and valued colleague. These are just the women we know about. We honor those who have passed that were lost to follow up over the years of CHIWOS. Thank you, and your voices are never forgotten. I would like to acknowledge all those who have contributed their time and expertise to the legacy of CHIWOS, past, present, and future, and especially to the women living with HIV. This is your achievement. Thank you, and my contact information is below.